Lore, we love it, we relish in it, there's lots of it out there, especially in video games, many of which tirelessly shove cutscenes and dialogues and various other methods and ways of story delivery square into unassuming player faces. But you know, sometimes it's not as obvious, there's little morsels and yes, sometimes entire buffets of interesting tidbits of knowledge concealed within more obscure areas of games. For there are worlds so positively overflowing with information that a player would surely be overwhelmed by the sheer deluge of precious details were a game director to decide that everything is equally important and no piece of lore is to be wasted. Now, they can't do that obviously, not if they want to sell any copy of any game at all ever, and not if we want to avoid that any RPG in the world become an experience of overwhelming pace-freezing slogitude. So it falls upon me to inform the masses of all the obscure pieces of video game knowledge that would otherwise be lost to the void forever. Hey, it's me, John Fishman. This channel was basically just born yesterday, and yet I am here having aspirations, wishing to exercise my creative abilities to take this venture into greater and further heights. So I'm making a series now, yes, a whole series of videos with an indeterminate endpoint, all complete with a theme, a name, and a theme, and an already set theme, and things to talk about, and maybe make some sense all along the way, we'll see. Alright, it was terrible, but I'll take it. For this one, which I have lovingly dubbed Precious Prose, I've decided to look at something that's been fascinating me for a while. Content and text and wealth of information that has been relegated to the sidelines, hidden and obscured. That's the same fucking thing. Behind more overtly presented story elements. If you play a lot of RPGs or other games with rich world building, you spend a lot of time reading character dialogue, or story, or watching cutscenes and trying to comprehend whatever the shit is happening at any given point in Warframe. And that's all cool and fun and interesting, mostly, sometimes not, sometimes it's ass and boring and I'd rather spend my time doing anything else. But there are things in games often forgotten for lack of time or interest or general overindulgence and gacha dailies of which now consume all of your spare time that could be used in wiser ways. Things like descriptions of items, weapons, armor, side quests, characters, places, events, furniture, crafting components, ores, woods, food, and most importantly, fish. Imagine there's some guy out there whose job it is to write descriptions all day, thousands of pages of supplemental content, a wealth of handcrafted words are lost to the void, never to be appreciated by anyone. At least it used to be like that, but they probably fired all the writers last year, save a pitiful amount of money, and instead generate thousands of item descriptions a second with complex agentic N8N setups accelerating the decline of human creativity and creating heinous drivel in the process that would not be fit for a monkey to read. Well, I for one won't stand for it. There's much to be discovered, largely untapped potential for both hilarity and tragedy in such writing so far deprived of its proper audience. It's great fun, I would say, if there was any fun to be had with what we're doing today, because every time you take so much as a sightlong glance at the Nier franchise, you are inadvertently overcome with a great all-consuming sorrow. Because that's what the game is, very sad, tragedy around every corner. Can't help but feel like my heart's been put in a vice every time I think back to Ending D. Maybe that's just because of what that ending means for me personally as a player, but that may be the subject of a different video and also spoiler territory, so we're not talking about it. That's not what this video is about. This is a video about the stuff that's hidden and obscure, and not a lot of people will be reading when playing the game ever. It's about weapons in particular, of which Nier has a great variety, each of which is useful and upgradable to a level of 4 at most, meaning you may use any that suits your fancy all the way right up to the end of the game. I mean, it's suboptimal in most cases, but sometimes fun is better than optimal. Maybe you don't want to crush all the obstacles in your path without resistance using the single strongest sword in the game. Maybe bonking them on the head with a rusty pipe is more up your alley. But you see, the power and usability of weapons is not what we're going to be concerning ourselves with today, as there is a different quality to this upgrade system that makes it a subject of closer scrutiny for us. Yes, as you procure the materials necessary to go through the various enhancement steps, you increase the overall capabilities of your implements of destruction. But you also get a nice, unexpected bonus on top of it, short little stories, elucidations on characters, world events, and locations. With one attached to every level of every weapon, there are a total of 4 delightful stories per individual item to uncover. This is very enjoyable when you're not forced to level up every last one because that's the requirement to see the final ending for some reason, which is what you had to do in the original version of Nier Replicant, which was an ungodly expenditure of time and effort that would drain all love for the franchise from your very soul. A mechanic born of such evil should be expected from a man such as Yoko Taro, whom is possessed by a seething hatred for the human race. A man who tirelessly labors to forge such gameplay elements that are precisely engineered to dissuade players from wanting to continue. Good guy Square Enix, however, removed that requirement, and now you can experience all of Nier without spending untold decades grinding your sanity away growing flowers. With so many weapons to choose from, there's frankly enough material here to make 3 videos from, which maybe I will. Stay tuned for future releases. But for today, we'll focus on a set of weapons of particular importance for the main story and character cast of Nier Replicant. Being wise in the ways of Nier lore, you may notice that a particular set of weapons of the DLC variety are absent from this list, and you would be correct, and smart, and very perceptive, and maybe somewhat peeved, but worry not. Worry not yourself, that's what I wrote. What is that sentence? Worry not yourself. But worry not yourself, for surely we will cover them in the future. But I don't know, would that even be Nier anymore? We're on thin ice with those things, and frankly they frighten me with the murderous aura which emanates from their blood-stained blades. Looking at the information I've collected, it appears there's a particular bias towards one-handed swords, as all the weapons for today's showcase are members of this particular category. Well, I don't know, maybe it's a particular fondness Mr. Taro has for the quickness of such instruments, or maybe it's because it's the kind of weapon you start with and everything else is added later as a sort of supplemental combat option. But you know, enough of the ramblings, there's no more time. A great many disgruntled of YouTube audience will have my head if I don't get to the point momentarily, so here's our first item of today. The Blade of Treachery is a one-handed weapon that can be found in Emil's manor only after exploring the eerie location again after a significant leap forward in time. Attached to it is a story you may find long before you should be privy to the knowledge contained therein. Why is that, you may ask? Well, if you're familiar with the story of the game, the answer to that question should become quite obvious quite soon. The sisters were puppets of complex machinery. So fine was their construction that any who laid eyes upon them assumed they were human in every way. They were the embodiment of man's greatest technological achievements. They walked like humans, ate like humans, laughed like humans. The one thing they could not do, however, was shed tears, for they were not designed that way. Complex machinery, fascinating. We're still very far off of the time period of Nier Automata where artificial life is commonplace, and yet it appears as though androids already existed way back when Yorha wasn't even conceived of yet. Not only has this information interesting implications for the future and how the world would further develop to its later desolate state, but it also reveals that these machine people are maybe among us and alive right now in this moment. What a terrifying proposition. I hope we'll never have to test our strength against powerful superhuman android people. That would be the most terrible situation indeed. Alright, let's keep reading. Because the sisters were machines, they felt nothing. Oh, they might mourn as humans did, but they experienced no true sadness, for they did not know what sadness was. Even when their friends perished in tragic accidents, and their creator died of disease, they felt nothing. To the sisters, all it meant was that those people no longer existed. We learned that the android sisters experienced no sadness. Whether that means they didn't experience any other emotion either, we don't know, but it's not implied that they wouldn't know what joy or anger is. I mean, maybe they don't say that here, but it's an interesting possibility to consider. One might argue too if that means they are incomplete because they are lacking the emotional capabilities of the humans they were modeled after, or if it means they are perfect because they have no need for sentiments that would interfere with their mission. On to level 3. It was a warm spring's day when a lone cat wandered into their home. It was a scrawny, filthy thing riddled with disease. What a bother, the sisters thought, as they looked down at the wretched creature. But they fed it milk, wiped it clean, and kept it warm, and soon the cat was well again. From that day forth, it would linger wherever the sisters were, brushing against their legs when it wanted food. If it caught a mouse, it would bring it back to boast its prowess. If it wanted love, it would cry out to them in a mewling voice. Alright, so they adopted a cute little cat now. Presumably. I mean, the cat kind of just hangs out at their place, and the story doesn't overtly state if they have any affection for it, but it's heavily implied at least, you know, since they didn't kick it out, or delete its existence, or stopped feeding it so it would go away. No, they did feed it, and kept feeding it, and allowed it to stay with them in their home, so it appears as though the androids, after what may be hundreds of years of numbness, started experiencing an emotional connection with a living, breathing thing. Well, that's heartwarming and a mighty fine development that was entirely unexpected. I'm sure nothing else is going to happen to shatter that newfound happiness and replace it with emotional devastation. Let's see. It was a cold winter's day when the cat came into their house, let out a feeble squeak, and died. Time and again did the younger sister shake the cat's body. Time and again did the elder sister call out to it, but the cat neither moved nor responded. In that moment, the sisters felt as though they felt something break deep inside their chests. And from that day forth, they truly felt nothing at all. And the story ends as one might have expected, with two non-human beings whom had begun to learn of compassion and kindness, who found feelings blossom in a place where none existed before, but perhaps because the joy and affection they started feeling was so unexpected and potent, they were woefully unprepared of what it would be like when it was taken away. Such is the nature of any joy, to fade one day and be replaced with either nothingness or an equally powerful sorrow. If you live a regular human life, you know this. You get used to it. You find in yourself the resilience and acceptance to carry on with such mourning. But because the sisters were overwhelmed by such unexpected emotional potency, instead of living through it and allowing themselves to mourn, they shut it all off instead. At least until one of them would be slain in combat later, and the other would find that she could no longer hold the suffering at bay, and exploded in a ferocious rage that would eventually cost her her own life as well. But that is part of a different story. Well, that sure was a bummer. I'm sure the next story will bring some much-needed levity to this depressing menagerie of heartbreaking lore fragments. Oh wait, I forgot we're talking about the Nier franchise for a second, so after all it seems like we're completely boned. Now, hold on, leave it to me, I can figure it out. There's gotta be a weapon out there that's not forged from all-consuming nihilism and depression. Oh wait, what do we have here? A soulless iron pipe. Well, that's an odd and goofy weapon. How could this possibly plunge us deeper into despair? May 21st. We finally run out of money. Food just costs a lot more nowadays because of the war. We tried begging at the church, but they have their hands full caring for the wounded and can't spare anything. Jonas really lost a lot of weight. I wish I could get her something to eat. Yes, well, it appears the vital fact escaped me that this is a weapon that was wielded by Nier himself in the opening sequence of the game in defense of his sister mostly, but also his own life. A weapon that later in the game is acquired as a reward for a quest that takes you back to relive the events of the past. What reads like the entry of a diary harkens back to a time slightly before what was presented to us in the game's opening. We learn that the world was embroiled in the war, and supply shortages hiked the prices of food, of which now two poor orphan children could no longer afford. Trying the last conceivable place that could offer any compassion to lost children, they are once again met with a rejection. But the young brother thinks of nothing but his sister, and racks his brain about how he may procure food to save her from starvation. For a pleasant surprise, they somehow manage, and the diary jumps a couple of months into the future. July 15th. We met a nice lady who gave us some food. At first, I thought she was homeless like us, but she said she was joining some kind of relief and support thing run by the government, so we decided to go with her. At least Jonas seems to be doing okay today. Ah yes, finally, relief. Help offered by a kind stranger. Salvation for two children who have no choice but to trust the words of adults. Of course, any reasonable reader, of which you surely are, will not be able to fight the suspicion that this kind old lady may end up turning out to be not all that kind after all. But maybe it's fine, maybe we're breeding distrust for old granny over here for nothing, and she really is just trying to help. Well, you see, August 1st. That nice lady from before I used the book and turned into a monster. We ran away as fast as we could, because I don't think she's human anymore. Everything those adults told us was a lie. They won't give us money. They won't treat Yona's illness. Also, there's a huge wall around the city now, and we can't get out. We never should have come here. Yeah, alright, turns out the old lady wasn't all that nice after all. Or maybe she was, we don't really know that from the story. This is a diary entry written from the perspective of Nier, so it reflects his thoughts and emotions, not necessarily what actually happened. So it is entirely possible that this old lady just happened to pick up a weird magical book by accident, and it turned her into a terrible monstrosity against her will. Considering the situation they experienced, however, the children felt rightfully betrayed and concluded that there was no adult out there they could trust anymore. Which is reflected in the last entry of Nier's diary, as now the both of them are on their own. August 5th. It's so cold today. I can't believe it's summer. I can actually see my breath. We decided to hide from monsters in an abandoned supermarket. We found a few old cans of food there, but no, those are gone. Also, Yona's cough just won't quit. I've got a really bad feeling about this. Through the descriptions contained in the diary of Nier, we finally arrive at the starting point, the location for the kickoff of the events of the game. The abandoned supermarket building where the two orphan siblings sought shelter from the bitter cold of a strange summer. But from reading all entries, it's already apparent that this is the end of the line. Yona is growing weak, food is still in short supply, and monsters are roaming the streets. There is nowhere to go and nowhere to run to, with the entire city encased by a massive wall that shuts all remaining survivors inside. Which marks the end of this story, and as they say, the rest is history. Or, well, the story of Nier Replicant. The things that happen after that are the things you already know, probably. Alright, everything has been a gut-wrenching, horrible disaster thus far, but I can still save it. I swear, I got one more ace up my sleeve. We look at the far end of the weapon spectrum now. The final one. The very last secret weapon you obtain after playing all the game's endings, including the final secret ending that's only available in the remake version of the game. The only happy ending you'll ever get in any of these games, mind you. This is the Sword of Kaine, the stories of which are short and succinct. Despite that, they do shed a little light on what sort of person Kaine is and how she lived her life. She fears the pain, the suffering, the sadness of losing those she cherishes. However faint, that feeling alone remained with her. This is the part of Kaine she shows to nobody. The abrasive personality and harsh tone are just a thin veneer to push all around her away. She lives in terror of being hurt again, distrustful of the world and its inhabitants who have once already shunned and abandoned her, in fear of growing close to anyone ever again and having to accept the possibility that she might lose them as she once lost her grandmother. Living in constant suffocation, she is unable to open her heart to anyone, at least until she finds a group of misfit friends who will not abandon her, no matter how many times she desperately tries to push them away. She fights. Her swordsmanship is so violent, it wards off sorrow itself. Nothing can stop her vengeful blade its grim work, not even the fountains of blood that cloud her vision. She replaces the fear and sadness with anger, and the way she fights reflects this. Her violent strokes lacking any hint of finesse. She needs this. She needs to unload her frustration in combat. The more enemies she mows down with her blade, the more her heart will be numb to what slumbers inside. There's no choice but to keep fighting, for if she were to ever stop, the feelings will come bubbling up to drag her down and choke the life out of her. She dreams. The darkness sings to her of solitude and despair, but she resists, time and again, never breaking. Kaine desperately wishes for it all to end, to be engulfed in darkness forever, and be rid of the weight that's painfully resting on her chest. For everything is better than to live the way she does, in constant avoidance of the suffering she cannot bear to face. But she resists, or maybe she cannot bring herself to do it. There is a spark left somewhere within her, some reason to keep on going. Even if it means to experience suffering beyond her imagining, the suffering of losing the new friends she found and now cherishes. Even when past the scars running through her heart, love is starting to take root, and that too is taken away from her without her even knowing it was ever there. But again, something remains. some knowing that something used to be there, someone used to be by her side. She presses on. Even if the future that awaits has no meaning, she presses on. Because this is the world with a Nier. And against all reason and logic, she stands and fights once more. Because even though there's no way she could, she remembers. She remembers that someone used to be there, whose existence was erased from this world. For this one scar brings her pain so powerful and profound that it cannot be erased. She finds a way. She fights, and eventually, she succeeds. And through the actions of Kaine alone, and thanks to the pain she never abandoned, a name that should no longer exist is restored to the world. And a story that once only knew tragedy is brought to the singular positive conclusion that exists across all possible realities. The one and only happy ending of Nier. Well, that was a fun Sunday afternoon stroll through some not at all depressing, but depressing. I'm not delaying this. Well, that was a fun Sunday afternoon stroll through some not at all depression-inducing story bits. I'm glad we've been on this journey together. Yeah, okay, Nier is not a franchise that is known to delight its players with visions of a world where everyone lives together in happiness. But I'm glad we could cap this video off on a positive note, because if I keep writing all of these tearjerkers, I'm going to be in need of therapy quite soon. Look forward to the next video because I'm going to need something that brings some much needed levity into my life once again. Anyway, that's all from me. See you later.